Right, so now we're going to be looking at the doctor's opinion. And as you can see, the doctor's opinion doesn't have a page number, right? Why do you think it doesn't have a page number?
Because it's not a part of the solution.
Because it's not part of the solution. Bill's story starts on page 1, and there we are being told that the program of recovery, the solution, is 164 pages, from page 1 to 164 pages. So people start reading on page 1, which is Bill's story. But a lot of people don't read the history, and they don't read specifically the doctor's opinion. The doctor is going to describe exactly what is our problem. And if you, so another analogy, imagine you go to the doctor and you have a backache. And you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you, you tell him you have a backache and he gives you antibiotics without giving you a proper diagnosis, without doing a scan or without doing an x-ray. You will think he's a bad practitioner, he's not a really good doctor, and I will say, you know, you better see somebody else. But if the doctor sends you for a scan and he sends you for an x-ray and then say, okay, we've got all the information, we can give you the diagnosis, we're going to give you a treatment for your backache and for the back problem, then you will say, okay, now I've got a chance to recover. So if you're starting the big book on page 1, which is Bill's story, and they're telling you what to do, because that's the solution, and you don't know what is your problem, it's going to be very difficult to apply a treatment to your problem, a solution to your problem. So remember, this, all of this is really, really important to take into consideration. Also, I need to remind you people that I do not believe in God. That's me, that's my stuff. And therefore, in order to keep it simple for the people who don't believe in God or spirituality, we are going to read the book, and I'm going to be changing from time to time the word God into solution. And when we talk about spirituality or spiritual principles, we're going to look at it into morality, because being honest doesn't have to be spiritual. Being honest to me is about morality. So we're going to be now looking at exactly what is the problem.
The doctor's opinion. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book.
Okay, can you highlight, please? The plan of recovery described in this book. And I forgot to ask you guys, on the top of that page, above the doctor's opinion, can you write in big letters the problem? So remember, step 1 and 2 is about gathering the information. So we need to understand what is the problem and what is the solution to our problem in order to be really able to be armed with information. And here we're going to admit, at the end of this chapter, do we think that we have a problem, or do we think maybe that we don't have that problem? Okay, go ahead.
Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital specialising in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. To whom it may concern.
Stop. Can you write first letter? Because the good doctor provided 2 letters. This is the first letter.
I have specialised in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless.
Okay, so can you highlight first, one color, 1934. And then can you highlight, was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. So use a different color. Who was this person, do you think? It was Bill Wilson, Bill W., that's right. So remember, the good doctor worked with thousands of alcoholics, with a lot of people, and he had come to regard a certain type of alcoholics as hopeless. Why do you think he referred to these people as hopeless?
Because he couldn't help them.
Because he couldn't help them, and because nobody could help them. So you see, some people might be helped with a little bit of psychotherapy, some people might be helped with medication, some people might be helped in different ways. But there are one type of people, and I am one of these people, who are hopeless type of alcoholic. And these people, nothing worked for them. For me, the medication didn't work, the hospital didn't work, the jail didn't work, the psychiatric hospital where I was actually locked in didn't work. Nothing worked until this program of recovery. Okay.
In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families.
Okay, can you stop and can you just underline his third treatment? So here we're being told Bill W. went 3 times for treatment. This is his third treatment, and now something has happened to Bill. Something is happening to Bill.
This man and over 100 others appear to have recovered.
Okay, this man and over 100 others appear to have recovered. This is recovered number 5. And remember, this is the doctor, the medical director, who's worked with thousands of alcoholics, who's now telling us in his letter, these men and over 100 others appear to have recovered. From being hopeless to recovered. Go ahead.
I personally know scores of cases who were of the type with whom other methods have failed completely. These facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group that may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of such situations. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves.
Okay, can you highlight? You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves.
Very truly yours, William D. Silkworth, MD. The physician who, at our request, gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind.
Can you highlight, please? In this statement, it confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind, and underline that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. Here we got 2 components, the body and the mind. Okay, can you write on the side, twofold illness? And I hope people can understand me. Twofold illness.
Twofold illness.
That's the
That's
one.
it.
It's the sexy French accent coming through, and sometimes people don't understand. So you have a twofold illness. Thank you.
It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives.
Can you highlight? We were maladjusted to life, but we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defective. So what it means here, it says like we cannot justify the consequences of our drinking just because we're a little bit depressed, or because our partner left us, or because we left our job, or because we lost our job. Sorry, something is very, very wrong when we use substance. And remember, guys, we're talking. Addiction is substance, drugs and alcohol, but it's also behavioral, food, sugar, we talk about the food, the gambling, the shopping, and the behavior is as bad and it can be as dangerous as the substance, because that was my experience also. It was incredibly painful. Go ahead.
These things were true to some extent, in fact to a considerable extent with some of us. But we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out the physical factor is incomplete.
Can you highlight? In our belief, any picture of alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete.
The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may of course mean little. But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as an altruistic plane, we favour hospitalisation for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. More often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he is approached, as he has then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer.
Can you highlight, please? So more often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before his approach, as he has then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. So with alcohol, if you work with somebody who's been drinking heavily, give them a few days, literally, to clear up basically their mind. If you are working with somebody who's using drugs, including crystal meth, give it a good week for them, for their mind to clear up a little bit. Okay?
The doctor writes,
Can you write second letter? This is our second letter from the doctor.
the subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcohol addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. There was, therefore, a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages.
Can you highlight, please? Covered in such masterly details in these pages. Remember, this is a clinical director of a hospital treating alcoholism and drug addiction. This guy, has a PhD. This guy's probably written a few books too, and he's telling us now, these people have written a book and they covered literally the problem and the solution in masterly detail. Go ahead.
We doctors have realised for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. What with our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book came under our care in this hospital, and while here, he acquired some ideas which put into practical application at once.
Okay, can you highlight all this? So many years ago, one of the leading contributors to this book, Bill W. Obviously, that was Bill W. So it's one of the contributors. There were 100 of them. Came under our care in this hospital, and while here, he acquired some idea which he put into practical application at once.
Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving, we consented. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. The unselfishness of these men, as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has laboured long and wearily in this alcoholic field.
Can you go back and highlight the unselfishness? So very often you're gonna hear things in rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, in the meetings or whichever 12-step program, and a lot of things are being said, and particularly it's a selfish program because in order to keep it, you had to give it away. Well, actually, I don't believe it is selfish, and I understand the meaning behind it, but we have to remember we are selfless. We are being unselfish. We are taking time out of our own personal time to help other people, so we are unselfish.
They believe in themselves and still more in the power which pulls alcoholics back from the gates of death.
Can you highlight, please? They believe in themselves and still more in a power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gate of death. I am a believer. I don't believe in God, but as a result of doing this program, I came to believe, and I know these programs save lives.
Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit.
Can you highlight this? Of course, an alcoholic ought to be freed from his physical craving for liquor, and this often requires a definite hospital procedure before psychological measures can be of maximum benefit. So remember that we have to be very clear here. Alcoholism and addiction is one component, but remember that somebody who is dependent, who needs basically to go into detox and help with some medication, are not necessarily addicts or alcoholics. It's not because you are dependent on a substance that you are necessarily an addict. And we need to be very careful, because I think a lot of people might have come to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or other 12-step fellowship and been told they were drug addict or alcoholic, when actually all they were dependent. And they don't actually identify with the true illness, which is the hopelessness of the alcoholic. Does that make sense? And we need to be very clear, because what I believe has happened over time is a lot of people have never opened the big book, never done the steps, and they magically recovered. And I believe the people who might have had that experience might not necessarily be addicts. They might have been dependent at the time, but they might not have the true illness. That's my theory.
Should we also say, if you are dependent on alcohol, going cold turkey can be very dangerous. So
That's
you should
right.
talk to a doctor and not just try and do it by yourself.
Absolutely. Because you can actually have a seizure. And a seizure will mean you can have a heart attack and you can die. And that's why alcoholism and dependency on alcohol is treated in a hospital with a detox program of 5 to 10 days with benzos. And that keeps the people stable. With the other drugs, we have different mechanisms. If it's heroin, we've got Subutex or methadone. And for the gay club drugs, we're also using benzos for them, which is a bit more difficult and a bit different also. Anyway, okay.
We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all, and once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve.
Okay, can you highlight the whole paragraph? We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, and that the phenomenon of craving, the name of that allergy, which is called the phenomenon of craving, is limited to that class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. Highlight everything to astonishingly difficult to solve. So it's very interesting here, because an article was published in a Lancet in 1937 concerning the phenomenon of craving and bad allergy. So if you do a little bit of research, you can find that article. So here we talk about an allergy of the body. Can you tell me what is the allergy associated to peanuts, to nuts?
Is anaphylaxis.
Anaphylactic shock. When people eat nuts and they are allergic to nuts, they have something called anaphylactic shock. So that's the name. So they have a physical allergy. When they eat nuts, the name of that allergy that is created is called anaphylactic shock. For the alcoholic or the drug addict, so which is a substance addiction, if we take any kind of alcohol or drug into our system, we have a physical allergy, and that is called the phenomenon of craving. Does that make sense? Okay, go ahead.
Frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives.
Okay, can you highlight this? In nearly all cases, the ideas must be grounded in a solution You need to believe there might be a solution if you are to recreate your life. And I will argue, instead of, in nearly all cases, I would say if you have the twofold illness, and if you're hopeless type of alcoholic, I will argue that it's in all cases, you need to believe in a solution.
And what the frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices, I think that's referring to when your wife or your family and they beg you to stop.
That's right.
And you love them and you want to stop, but like there's not enough power in that to stop.
That's right. People can't keep us sober or fix us. But it's nothing anybody says can have the power to restore us to sanity. So trying to plead with an addict is entirely a waste of time. That's what it means.
If any feel that as psychiatrists direct in hospital for alcoholics, we appear somewhat sentimental, let them stand with us a while on the firing line. See the tragedies, the despairing wives, the little children. Let the solving of these problems become a part of their daily work, and even of their sleeping moments. And the most cynical will not wonder that we have accepted and encouraged this movement. We feel, after many years of experience, that we have found nothing which has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men than the altruistic movement now growing up among them. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that, while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless, irritable, and discontented, unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks. Drinks which they see others taking with impunity. After they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops, they pass through the well-known stages of a spree, emerging resourceful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, and unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery.
Okay, can you highlight the whole para? Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol, all the way to very little hope of his recovery. And this is literally the problem. So often I go to meetings and meet with people, and we talk a lot about the program, and the first question is, what is the problem? And a lot of people are unable to tell you what is the problem. They talk about the consequences. They say, well, alcohol is my problem, and my wife is the problem, or I've lost my job. All of these have nothing to do with the problem. And remember, we all have the same problem if you are identifying as a hopeless alcoholic. So we're going to go through all of this. And I want you, after you highlighted the whole paragraph, I want you to underline. So, men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. So underline because they like the effect produced by alcohol. What does that mean?
Filling the hole.
It works. It does something to people. It works, okay? Then if you go a bit further down, you say they are restless, irritable, and discontented. Can you underline restless, irritable, and discontent? So people are restless, irritable, and discontent. I called it the hole in the soul. I can't tell you what it is. I can't tell you exactly what it feels like, but it's incredibly uncomfortable. It can even become physically painful. This is how strong that feeling can be. But I can't tell you what it is. I can't go to the doctor and say, this is exactly what it is, give me something for it. I don't know. I can't tell you, but it feels really, really odd. And I've had that feelings from the day I was born. From the day I was a little child, I knew something was different about me. I believe, and that's my theory, that I was born with a predisposition. People might think it's, nature, nurture. They learned, to become alcoholic. Some of us believe that they were born with it. To me, I was born with that predisposition. I was born with that hole in the soul. So when I feel restless, irritable, and discontent, I drink, or I use drugs, or I use sex, or shopping, or gambling, or whatever it is to actually fill the hole in the soul, to remove that feeling. When I drink alcohol or do drugs or use sex, and I go into an app and I go into trying to satisfy that urge, then I have a desire. That desire, when I succumb to that desire, I drink or use drugs, the phenomenon of craving develops. So when I put drugs and alcohol into my body, something happens, and that's the physical allergy. Okay? And then unless the person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his or her recovery. So the psychic change is the spiritual awakening, the personality change. And we need to have that experience in order to recover. Here it's a spiritual awakening. If you don't have that spiritual awakening, it's not gonna happen. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I drink and I use drugs, or I use sex or food or whatever it is as a symptom in order to fill the hole in the soul, in order to remove that feeling that is so uncomfortable. When I act on that desire, because at that point it's merely a desire, then the physical allergy, the phenomenon of craving occurs, and all the bets are off. Then basically I can't stop. And for me, at the end, I just ended up in a hospital all the time because I was a blackout drinker. So there is a progression. For some people, it takes a few years, but eventually you will black out, like most people, and the phenomenon of craving will occur all the time. So what do you think is the solution to this problem?
The steps.
That's right. The steps is the solution, and we're going to learn about it later. But now each time we're going to start a chapter, I'm going to ask you what is the problem. And then when we study the solution, I will ask you what is the solution to the problem. And then when we looked at how to bring the solution to light, I will ask you, how do we go from being sober to being emotionally sober? Okay? Go ahead.
On the other hand, and strange as this may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only effort necessary being that required to follow a few simple rules.
Okay, so this is very interesting. Can you highlight, please? Suddenly found himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only effort necessary being that require a few simple rules. So often I ask people, so what do you think of the simple rules? And they say, the steps. I'm like, well, no, because if you read, it says, the same person who seemed to be doomed has so many problems and despair, that they're telling us here that person has already done the step. Once he had a psychic change, in order to have a psychic change, you need to do the steps. So that person completed the program of recovery and now is recovered. And now they found themselves easily able to control their desires. Often in meetings, I hear people say, oh, I'm having a craving. So I've asked, you ask the question is, have you been drinking today? And they say, no. I said, so therefore you don't have a craving. You're merely having a desire. You see how powerful those words can be. So you have a desire, but if you have a desire and you've gone through the program of recovery, you will be able to control that desire. And this is going to be by practicing the design for living. So can you write design for living? And the design for living is to carry the message, to practice the principle, and I've added to practice your assets, which is your step 6 and 7, which we'll look at later on.
Men have cried out to me in sincere and despairing appeal. Doctor, I cannot go on like this. I have everything to live for. I must stop, but I cannot. You must help me. Faced with this problem, if a doctor is honest with himself, he must sometimes feel his own inadequacy. Although he gives all that is in him, often it is not enough. One feels that something more than human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change.
Can you highlight, please? Although he gives all that is in him, it is often not enough. One feels that something more than a human power is needed to produce the essential psychic change. People believe it might be God. Maybe some people believe in some kind of spirituality. I believe in a solution. I believe that the big book is going to give us clear direction on how to have that spiritual awakening, that psychic change, that personality change to help us recover.
Though the aggregate of recoveries resulting from psychiatric effort is considerable, we physicians must admit we have made little impression upon the problem as a whole. Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach.
Can you highlight, please? Many types do not respond to the ordinary psychological approach, and as explained earlier, that was me. I've done psychotherapy, I've done, I went to psychiatric hospital, I've done the medication, I've done the gel, I've done everything. Nothing worked for me.
I do not hold with those who believe that alcoholism is entirely a problem of mental control. I've had many men who had, for example, worked a period of months on some problems or business deal which was to be settled on a certain date favourably to them. They took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape. They were drinking to overcome a craving beyond their mental control.
That's right. Can you highlight? So we took a drink a day or so prior to the date, and then the phenomenon of craving, the physical allergy, at once became paramount to all other interests, so that the important appointment was not met. These men were not drinking to escape. They were not drinking because they didn't feel well in their head. They were drinking to overcome the physical allergy, the phenomenon of craving, because they were out of control. They couldn't stop. Can you identify with this?
Yeah.
But at some stage during your drinking career or your drugging career, there is a complete loss of control.
Yeah.
Okay.
There are many situations which arise out of the phenomenon of craving, which cause men to make the supreme sacrifice rather than continue to fight. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult, and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We are all familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over-remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. There is a type of man who is unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment.
Okay, can you just go back and underline admit, please? Unwilling to admit. So this type, there is the type of man who is unwilling to admit. And tell me, what is step one? Can somebody tell me what the step one is? We what?
Yeah. Admit that we are
We're
powerless.
powerless over drugs.
Okay, we admit. That's step one. We need to admit. And here there is a type of man who is unwilling to admit. If you're unwilling to admit, you cannot do your step one. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. There is a type who always believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can drink without danger. There is a manic depressive type who is perhaps the least understood by his friends and about whom a whole chapter could be written. Then there are types entirely normal in every respect except in the effect alcohol has upon them. They are often able, intelligent, friendly people. All these and many others have one symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving.
Can you highlight, please? One symptom in common. They cannot start drinking without developing the phenomenon of craving.
This phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and sets them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been, by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated.
Can you highlight, please, the whole thing? So this phenomenon, as we have suggested, may be the manifestation of an allergy which differentiates these people and set them apart as a distinct entity. It has never been by any treatment with which we are familiar, permanently eradicated. So what do you think we need to do for drugs and alcohol?
Abstain.
We need to abstain. complete abstinence. Continue.
The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence.
Can you highlight? The only relief we have to suggest is entire abstinence. So remember, for the substance addiction, we practice abstinence. But for the behavioral addiction, for the food, for the sex, we can't abstain. What do you think we put in place? A structure. And the structure could be the 3 circles, which we'll talk about later on within the program. We will give you an idea with the 3 circles. In the middle is the red, then the outer is the amber, and then you've got the green. The red is what we shouldn't do. So with the food, trying to be careful, in the kitchen, maybe sometime not to go in the kitchen. For the sex addiction, not going onto the apps, not going into the sauna, or the sort of things, or anonymous sex. And then we have the amber. The amber is like the thing that might be a little bit triggering. Like for me, going into the gym, when I take a shower, close the curtain, don't show yourself off, because ultimately that's another way of triggering. And then the green one, which is the healthy part. How can I have a healthy relationship? And remember, those circles, they are very organic. Your red can get into your green eventually, where you can actually safely go on an application, where you can actually meet people and have healthy sexual relationships. Okay? But so for drugs and alcohol is abstinence, complete abstinence. There's no to worry about it. And for the behavioral addiction, the sex, the sugar, the gambling, and all of these, you do structure. Although I just made a mistake, because for gambling, although it's a behavioral addiction, abstinence is the best way. Okay.
This immediately precipitates us into a seething cauldron of debate. Much has been written pro and con, but among physicians, the general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed.
Can you highlight, please? The general opinion seems to be that most chronic alcoholics are doomed. So what is the solution? The steps. That's right. So
what is the solution?
can you highlight? So what is the solution? And they're going to tell us what's the solution.
Perhaps I can best answer this by relating one of my experiences. About 1 year prior to this experience, a man who was brought in to be treated for chronic alcoholism. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage and seemed to be a case of pathological mental deterioration. He had lost everything worthwhile in life and was only living, one might say, to drink. He frankly admitted and believed that for him there was no hope. Following the elimination of alcohol, there was found to be no permanent brain injury. He accepted the plan outlined in this book.
Stop. He accepted the plan outlined in this book. So what did he accept to do?
The steps.
The steps. So what is the solution?
The steps.
That's right. Okay, his name, by the way, was Hank, H-A-N-K, Parkhurst, P-A-R-K-H-U-R-S-T. And his story is in the first edition of the big book. And the name of that story is The Unbeliever.
Have you read it?
No. It's an honest program. Shit, I should have said yes. No, I've never read it.
Homework for
Homework,
later.
yeah, when I go to bed, after my gratitude list, I'm going to read it.
1 year later, he called to see me, and I experienced a very strange sensation. I knew the man by name and partly recognised his features, but there all resemblance ended. From a trembling, despairing, nervous wreck had emerged a man brimming over with self-reliance and contentment. I talked with him for some time, but was not able to bring myself to feel that I had known him before. To me, he was a stranger, and so he left me. A long time has passed with no return to alcohol.
Can you highlight a long time has passed with no return to alcohol? And that idea, I don't know if you had that experience before in rooms. If you go to a meeting and you see a newcomer, somebody who comes to the meeting for the first time, and they look pretty awful. Some people do look. drained, they are exhausted, and this is their last chance. They come into the meeting and you see them a week or two later and they look different. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I have experienced this. You can see through their eyes. It is incredible, the transformation that can occur.
When I need a mental uplift, I think of another case brought in by a physician prominent in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis and, deciding his situation hopeless, had hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die.
Can you just underline this? Had hidden in a deserted barn, determined to die. His name was Fitzmayo, Fitzmayo. And his story is in a big book. And his story is called Our Southern Friend. Again, if you feel you want to get more information, in the evening after your gratitude list, you can read the story.
He was rescued by a searching party and in desperate condition brought to me. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with me in which he frankly stated he thought the treatment a waste of effort, unless I could assure him, which no one ever had, that in the future he would have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope would be through what we then called moral psychology, and we doubted if even that would have any effect.
Can you highlight, please? His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only hope will be through what we then call moral psychology, and we doubted even that would have any effect. Do you know what moral psychology was at the time?
Psychotherapy?
No, they used to shame people.
Used to what?
Shame.
Shame.
They used to shame people and tell them, can you see what you're doing to your family and your children? You know how bad you are. They used to shame people. That was the moral psychology.
However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book.
Okay, can you highlight? So, however, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book. What is that? That's right, the steps. He did become sold on doing the steps. So what happened since?
He has not had a drink for a great many years.
That's right.
I see him now and then, and he is a fine specimen of manhood, as one could wish to meet. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through, and though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray. William D. Silkworth, MD.
Can you highlight, please? I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through, and perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray. So my question to you guys, can you please tell me what is the problem?
Twofold illness.
Okay, tell me a bit more about the twofold illness, please.
Obsession of the mind. We have a hole in the soul.
Yeah, the obsession of the mind. So tell me a bit more about the obsession of the mind. What is the obsession of the mind? What did the doctor told us? How do we feel?
Restless, irritable, and discontent.
Okay, so when I'm restless, irritable, and discontent, what happens?
Have a desire.
We have a desire to soothe. So I don't necessarily want to drink or do drugs or have sex because I know there might be consequences. Because by that time now, I'm in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not here because I want the tea, the coffee, and the biscuits. I'm here because I am desperate, right? Mm-hmm. So now I have a desire. I don't want to drink. I don't want to do drugs, but I'm hopeless, right? So tell me a bit more. What happens when I drink?
The phenomenon of craving.
The phenomenon of craving kicks in. So, and this is also valid for the substance addiction, but also for the behavioral addiction. And some of you who are walking the big book with us at the moment, you might identify as a sex addict, or maybe you go to OA because you have a food problem. The phenomenon of craving is very much the same with the substance and with the behavioral. Is when we start, we cannot stop. Okay? So basically, we feel restless, irritable, and discontent. The hole in the soul, that's the obsession of the mind. Then when we pick up the phenomenon of craving, which is the physical allergy kicks in and we cannot stop. This is the problem. When people say the problem is the alcohol, it's the drugs, or they're talking about symptoms. The symptoms of addiction, which is substance addiction, is drugs and alcohol. The symptoms for behavioral addiction is sex, gambling, shopping, and so on. Right? All of these are symptoms. They are a manifestation of the problem, but they are not the problem. What do you think is the solution to our problem?
The steps.
The steps. The next chapter will be the solution.